Well, Publicity Secretary, Crude Oil Refiners Association of Nigeria, Eche Stephen Idoko, joins us now to discuss the ongoing protests, policies and programs that can help the government on ramping up refining of petroleum products and sales of crude in naira. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newsday.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you as well. Of course, based on the numerous interviews we've seen with those that have taken to the streets, Nigerians that have taken to the streets, some of them are asking for the fuel subsidy to be returned based on the hardship that's come as a result of the removal or partial removal, depending on how you view it. But of course, these protests highlight public frustration with fuel prices and availability. How do you respond to criticisms that local refiners have failed to meet domestic demands that contribute significantly to these issues?
It's rather unfortunate that a country that is a net producer of crude oil should be bedeviled with the challenges of shortages and high cost of products. In fact, the oxymoron is in the fact that at this point, crude oil is selling at its highest, and countries who are net producers have been raking in good fortunes. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and these countries have been counting the gains. But unfortunately, in our country, the opposite is the case. As the price of crude goes up, the condition of living becomes unbearable. And the reason why we have not been able to cash in on the gains of the high cost of crude oil is simply because we are just only an exporter of the raw material and haven't been able to enjoy the full benefits that comes from producing and refining. And that's what we have been clamoring for. At a point about 24 to 48 months ago, a committee set up by the federal government had come up with a way to see how we can maximize the benefits that would come from refining crude oil in country. And far-reaching recommendations were produced and approved by the same federal government. It's quite unfortunate that we are here now. And it will interest you to know that that same recommendation had a timeline of 18 months at most for us to begin to see the benefits of those recommendations if they had been implemented. It's more than 48 months now, and you can see Nigerians are growing under the pain of living in a regime of importing petroleum products.
Right. So where do we go from here? Because the first demand on the list of the protesters is, of course, the way they phrase it, and I quote, end subsidy scam and reverse fuel price to below 300 naira per litre. I'm reading that as it is written on the demands of the protesters. Tell me your position and what you think is feasible and realistic for this government to meet this type of request. Is it a realistic request, in your opinion?
Yeah. It is near realistic. In terms of getting an exact price below 200, a lot depends on it because one of the major determinants of price is the price of crude at the international market. So the higher the crude price, the higher the price of refined product at it were. But we can get a reasonable price for our refined petroleum products if it is done in country. One of the major steps is to ramp up domestic crude refining. And one of the items in the list of the recommendation by this committee set up by the same federal government led by the same APC was that there should be an intervention fund for the promotion of modular refineries and local refineries in general. And there was also a provision that there should be adequate supply of feedstocks to these refineries. that has been going on for a while. I would add that at some point, we have gained some traction with that, in that NUPRC had put in place a guideline for domestic crude supply obligation as provided for in the PIA. But the problem with that is that that same guideline has not been gazetted. We've had meetings. The last time we had meeting on that was about 2 or 3 months ago, and up until now, it has not been gazetted. None of the modular refineries, as I speak to you, have gotten a barrel of crude oil for them to refine under this arrangement. What has been the arrangement is that for those modular refineries that have production fields, have been relying on their production fields, and the others have been relying on third-party arrangements, basically, and have not been able to produce at full capacity. We are saying that at a critical time as this, and at a time when the price of petroleum products is playing significant role to the economic situation in the country, the government should have been more proactive and more active towards working with the local refiners in reducing the price of petroleum products through local production. We have been pushing for them to listen to the yearnings of local refiners. At a point, they kept saying that, oh, we have crude, we don't have refineries. Now we have refineries and we don't have crude. It is such an irony. If they can ramp up supply of feedstock to local refineries, we would begin to see some reprieves in what is happening with the pump price. Another very fundamental recommendation in that guideline was that the federal government, through the NNPC, which is their vehicle, who plays majorly in the downstream and in the petroleum industry, should partner with the private refineries for energy security purposes. And the NNPC knows this. In fact, they acknowledge this in a lot of their publications and communications to the media. You have to, at a point, meet with local refineries, partner with local refineries, invest in local refineries so that they can begin to produce and refine PMS, which is the most important petroleum product at this time. So what you do is, most of the refineries that are producing right now, that are refining right now, that are now refining PMS, you partner with them and enable their capacity to refine PMS. And from there, you can build a strategic bulk reserve. And in producing, and once you build this reserve, you can now begin to control prices through your bulk strategic reserves. And then one other aspect that was also mentioned in the guideline was the need to sell crude in naira. Now, if you have a crude strategic reserve and you are selling in naira, now you are no longer exposed to the dictates of the foreign exchange. And as such, you can control prices. In this level, you can actually see how you can get close to selling at that 300 or below 300.
Oh, thank you so much. You mentioned so many very important points, talking about the need to sell crude in naira, thereby no longer needing to be exposed to the dictates of what we have going on the global scene. But based on all that you've mentioned, you said earlier on, we have refineries now, we don't have crude. Talking about the pace of this committee that was set up by this APC administration, do you get a sense that this very important issue is not high on the priority list, or do you get a sense that this might be somewhat intentional?
Okay, I wouldn't know about it being intentional, but I think that more priority ought to be given to this particular piece of document, especially that it was painstakingly put together by an interministerial committee. On that committee, we had the Ministry of Petroleum, we had the Ministry of Finance, we had the Ministry of Trade and Investment, we had the Local Content Board, we had the Bank of Industry, and we had the CBN. It was a very, very, very robust committee. And then these committees painstakingly visited all the licensed refineries in Nigeria. And a lot of inputs were received. It beats me that after spending so much resources in developing such a resource that would transform the landscape in our downstream sector, that kind of document will be abandoned to gather dust at the shelves. I think that what ought to have been done, and we have reached out to this government severally, that have a look at that document again and let us see what we can do to ameliorate the sufferings of Nigerians. And I can assure you that if this data document is implemented, within 18 months or less, we'll begin to see reprieves, especially within the area of local refining. We cannot continue in the regime of petroleum product importation. It would not work. It would put pressure on the government. It will put pressure on the people. It will put pressure on the economy.
Now, of course, this issue has been on the front burner for a number of weeks now, especially given the face-off that happened between Dangote Refinery and the NMDPRA over the past few weeks. Of course, as much as it has been resolved and the resolution was that the crude would be sold in naira. Like you said, number one question, is that crude even available? Because most of it seems to have been mortgaged. So now that we've reached this agreement where crude will be sold in naira at a fixed price, my question to you is, what do you think that all of the hiccups in the process of the Dangote refinery coming online and churning out PMS, have we seen the end of what seemed to be a face-off between the refinery and the authorities?
Like I said, I would want to correct an impression. The situation we have is not just only with Dangote Refinery. I know Dangote is the poster boy and is the largest of all the refineries. But you see, if we begin to pay attention to the whole refining spectrum and every actor in the refinery space, I think we'll be closer to the problem than actually look at it as an individual thing. And the reason why there was that face-off in the first instance was because they looked at those interventions as favors being done to the Dangote refinery. No, it's an industry policy. The midstream in Nigeria, before the midstream collapsed at the death of the petroleum refineries in Nigeria, it used to be run solely by government. But after the democratic era, we have seen players come into the midstream in Nigeria. And what you have as the midstream in Nigeria, you can argue, is green. It's a very, very young segment in the industry. And so we need to start afresh and lay a blueprint for it to work. And the good thing about starting is that we have a lot of templates to copy. And what we have presented to the government from the stakeholders are blueprints that we have seen operate in other climes in the world that has succeeded.
All right.
Now, for this to work, it's not just to say, okay, you have addressed whatsoever is Dangote's need, and the question is, have you really addressed what their needs? But to also go along to set up templates that can be replicated for any entrant and any participant in this segment of the industry. So what we are saying is that let them be policy. It's not just enough for the Federal Executive Council to pronounce that, okay, sell crude in naira. What do you have to do? Is this going to be gazetted in the domestic crude supply obligations guideline? Or is there going to be an executive order to this effect? And then to speak to the issue of crude, we do not believe that we don't have crude in the country. We have people who are producing, who are selling crude. The problem is that you have to make it attractive for them to sell crude to local refiners. when you go to the IOCs, they will tell you that they are always willing to sell to us, but that the conditions ought to be right. And the CBN has a lot of role to play. If you're going to sell crude to refiners in naira, how are you going to hedge the risk of the producers who are selling to us in naira? So there have to be a switchboard at the CBN to actually handle these risks, to absorb these risks. These are the robust conversations we want to have with the economic team of the government and, of course, the regulators, to see that these reactions and these pronouncements are not just knee-jerk reactions, but reactions that will have far-reaching effect in the country.
We certainly hope you make good on those proposed conversations that you plan to have. But for now, we'd like to thank you for your contribution here on Newsday. Mr. Eche Stephen Idoko, Publicity Secretary, Crude Oil Refiners Association of Nigeria, thank you so much for joining us here on Newsday.